Liftoff.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the Movie Review Podcast. I'm Terrence Fisher, and I'm your host. And today we are going to be talking about the Netflix movie 4-part series, When They See Us. Now, if you're not familiar with this 4-part Netflix series, this is Ava DuVernay's latest piece. And if you're not familiar with her, she directed movies like Selma and 13th. And this movie is about the Central Park case that happened back in 1989. And if you're not familiar with this case, basically in a nutshell, a Caucasian lady was brutally raped and beaten in a park. And there were 5 boys who were falsely accused of the crime and did time in jail, serious time in jail, for being falsely accused of this crime. So the first thing I want to talk about is why this movie is so hard to watch and is so emotional and so touching to a lot of the people that are watching it, specifically Black people. And I'm going to suggest that the reason that this is so difficult to watch is because it's a familiar story that Black people are very, very, sensitive to and we're familiar with. These cases are unfortunately very common and have been very common in the Black communities. We all know of someone, we know of people who have gone through similar things, who have just been kind of, had kids or people or relatives or whatever in the wrong place at the wrong time, and who got caught up with something or, who just so happened to be doing something, crazy at the moment, like these boys were doing in the park, and they weren't doing anything wrong. They wasn't doing anything illegal. They were just, young teenagers in the park having fun, roughing each other up and all of this kind of stuff. And then this lady happens to get, beaten and assaulted and raped. And these boys get, accused of this crime. This is a really familiar story. Now, the thing about this is it's a familiar story to Black people, but I think anyone who watches this, anyone who really just takes the time to understand what's going on in this movie will be emotionally affected by it. I think it's in our human nature to, when we see atrocities like this and we see people suffer as these kids did. I mean, they were just young kids. I mean, I really like how the movie set them up as just like these young kids. The very first character that hit me was, I think it was Corey. It was the young boy who got hit by who the police hit with the helmet and knocked him out when he arrested him and all that kind of. I think that's his name in the movie. I'm not sure which character he portrayed, but I think it was Corey. But anyway, it showed the innocence. This actor, he had a real innocence about him. And it was like, wow, like this, you see these kids and they're just in a park having fun. And again, this is a familiar thing to especially, Black people, but just people in general. That's what we all did as kids. We all went to the parks. We all played basketball. We spend time, we was roughing each other up. We got into brawls and brustles with each other and stuff like that. Nothing serious necessarily, but nothing was against the law. No crimes were being committed or anything like that. So I want to propose that that's why this movie is so hard and so emotional, and it has such an effect on everyone who watches it, but specifically Black people who are watching it. So part 1 kind of deals with, precinct and police behaviors. You had these kids who were caught up in this deal and brought to the precinct and questioned. There were minors. They were questioned without their parents, which was illegal. They were, being questioned without their parents being there and all of that kind of stuff. And this was kind of a, snapshot of some of the atrocities that you see happening, in precincts like this. And it happens, disproportionately, I think, to young Black people and Black people, period. But it does happen to everybody, here and there. But this is something that historically has been happening disproportionately to Black people. So that's what part 1 kind of deals with. It deals with their arrest. You see them get arrested for something that they didn't do, and they're just caught up. And it's like the police show up and it's like, what the heck is going on? The boy, I think is it Kevin? I think it's Kevin, who was the only one who was 16 and considered an adult at the time. And this guy, it's so heartbreaking when you think about it. The young boy literally, he simply went down to the precinct because of his friend. His friend got caught, by the police, again, for doing nothing, but his friend got arrested by the police. and Kevin was standing on the side like, hey, what's going on? The cops came over and asked him, hey, you want to accompany your friend down to the precinct, and him just being a friend. It's really heartbreaking even talking about it. This young boy just being a friend to his young friend, to his pal, to his buddy, to his, his road dog. This at the time in your life where you're first developing close friends, where you're in middle school and early high school, you're developing close friends. This boy went to just to be there with his friend. And it's really heartbreaking to talk about. He went there to just be with his friend, and in the end was the person who ended up suffering the worst atrocities and the worst type of punishment out of all of the boys that were arrested. Now, the reason this is so heartbreaking is because if any of the boys if there were levels of like innocence, like some of the boys were level 2 or level 3 innocent, this boy was like at a -10. Like he just showed up to help his friend. That is so heartbreaking. Now, part 2 deals with mainly the court system and how the court system operated in this case. Talks about the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the lawyers, all the judges, all the jury, all of these things. And it spoke to, how we sort of have a debtor's prison in this country. These are Ava DuVernay's words, by the way. She said that, it speaks to how we have a debtor's prison in this country where, if you have money for bail, if you're rich, you can pay your way out of jail. But if you're kind of poor, on the poor side of things, and you don't have money, you're pretty much out of luck and you have to stay in jail. And, you can't afford, particular lawyers and stuff like that. This part 2 spoke to that stuff. It spoke to this whole system and how it's operated and how it's, inherently set up to sort of be biased against certain demographics of people. Now, part 3 spoke to sort of the juvenile detention center and how kids are being locked up in this country sort of disproportionately, especially, minority kids, and how these kids are sometimes put in adult facilities. They put this young boy, this 16-year-old boy in Rikers. I mean, some of the worst prisons in the country, in the world, some of the worst prisons in the world. They put this boy, he suffered, being beaten all of the time. He was put in solitary. He asked to be in solitary just so he couldn't be, beaten and all of this it is so crazy. So anyway, part 3 kind of spoke to that. It spoke to like the juvenile detention center and how, again, some of the minorities, or how minorities, period, get disproportionately put in these situations and sometimes get, in prison with adults. Now, part 4 kind of dealt with the post-incarceration of some of these boys, and what life was like with them getting out of prison. So if things couldn't get any worse, you get arrested for something that you didn't do. You get coerced into, admitting to something that you didn't do, or confessing to something that you didn't do. You spend all of this time in jail. You go through all of these juvenile homes, and for one, an adult prison. If that wasn't bad enough, part 4 deals with the post-incarceration. Once you get out of jail, once these kids got out of jail, how society treated them. Despite the fact that they were declared innocent, and despite the fact that the actual perpetrator of this crime came forward and admitted to the crime, had DNA evidence and everything. Now, also, let me say this. Let me back up for a minute, because this is an important part too. In this case, when these boys were arrested, there was literally zero evidence, no DNA, no handprints, no fingerprints, no, nothing under the kids' nails to say that they did anything to this woman. There was no sort of weapon involved where the woman was struck with or anything like that. In fact, it got so bad that the actual place that these kids were in the park, they found out that the lady was actually assaulted much further away from where these boys were in the park. And these boys spent all of this time in jail with literally zero evidence. This is why this movie is heartbreaking. Zero evidence against them. So anyway, like I say, in part 4, with this post incarceration thing, if it wasn't bad enough, we have a society that, treats these boys like second rate citizens after they get out of prison, despite the fact that their names were completely cleared. Completely cleared. They got out. The person who actually committed the crime, admitted to it. And these boys' names were cleared, and these boys were still treated like second-class citizens. There are people today who still don't think that these boys are innocent. That's what's heartbreaking about this. There are people who think these boys are still not innocent, that they had something to do with it. Why? Because I guess just 5 young black boys in a park, 5 young minorities in a park, somehow represents danger, or somehow represents doing something that they weren't supposed to do. Now let me sort of juxtapose this against other things by crimes by white people or non-minority people. Let's say it that way. You have a boy in a case just a few years ago, college boy, got caught raping a girl and assaulting her, went to court. I think he pleaded guilty, if I'm not mistaken. He pleaded guilty to the case. You know what they gave him? The judge didn't give him any time in jail because they said, oh, it might ruin his life. It might ruin his life. But you got 5 black boys whose youth, whose childhood was stripped from them. I mean, they don't get those years back. They weren't able to graduate high school. They wasn't able to make friends. The little boy, Corey, I think that's his name. I can't remember if it's Corey or Kevin, but the little boy, Corey, was a trumpet player. And again, that's stuff like that is personal to me because I'm a musician. This could have been the next, great jazz musician on earth. This could have been the next, hit music writer. That's who that could have been. In his childhood, all of these things were stripped away from him. Again, that's why this movie is so heartbreaking. It really is. And there's a lot to digest about this movie. Again, if you haven't seen it, I know there's a lot of people who start watching it and, maybe it's difficult for them to watch. But I do advise you to get through it. Go ahead and make yourself watch it. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I'll say that to everybody, especially non-black people who are watching this. Get comfortable with the uncomfortableness of stuff like this happening, because this is a reality that a lot of us face in this country. So, make yourself finish watching it. Pull up Netflix. You don't have anything to do. You have no excuse. You can watch Netflix in the car. I actually watched part of, I think, episode 2 in my car on my phone. I had the little, dashboard cam thing, or the dashboard holder for my phone. Pull up Netflix on my phone, was kind of watching it a little bit as I was driving, although you can't really pay that much attention to it because you're trying to drive and stay safe. But again, just make yourself watch this. Get through it. It's a difficult watch. I advise you not to watch it like right before bed. Watch it, sometime earlier during the day so you can kind of have a moment to kind of, digest and kind of, bring your mind away from it, because it really is. It's a difficult watch. I do wonder, is it as difficult watch for some minorities, or for non-minorities rather, than it is for minorities? I wonder, is it just the people who are disproportionately affected by this stuff, who are bothered, or who this movie has the most emotional impact on, versus, somebody who may think that these boys still did something and they are not innocent. Anyway, if you have not seen When They See Us, make sure you go on Netflix right now and check it out. Do yourself a favor. Check it out. At the end of the day, it's just a good movie. Whether or not you think, whatever you think about these boys' cases, whatever your outcome is, watch the show. It is a really good series. I think you'll appreciate it. Ava DuVernay, I tip my hat to her. She's on a roll where she's, putting these stories like this, forward, and she's doing things and she's bringing these stories to life. And I think that they're important. So anyway, go on Netflix, check out When They See Us, and I'll see you guys in the next show.